roads have been dry and I've been able to spend some time tuning the LS2 so that its computer gets along with the new camshaft. The tune is coming along quite nicely and it's running really well, so let's go for a spin. When driving the C6, I always start out by setting the gauge to oil temperature, and I religiously hold off on going to wide open throttle or even higher RPMs at part throttle until the oil reaches 160 degrees. So we'll take it easy until then. Well, the engine is up to full operating temp, so let's get on it a little bit and see how it runs. let's do a few wide open throttle pulls to gather some good scan data at various RPMs. First, to get some good low RPM wide open throttle data for tuning, I'll put it into third gear at a pretty low RPM and go to wide open throttle for a few seconds. Next, to get some good mid and upper RPM range data, I'll start out in second at a very low RPM and take it to a much higher RPM at wide open throttle. That's it. Now, just for fun, I'm going to start from a dead stop and run it all the way through second gear. So as you just saw, it runs and behaves quite nicely, and I think I've picked up a little bit of horsepower, but not to the point where I'm grinning ear to ear confident that I've picked up a bunch of horsepower. The more I think about it, I'm not really certain I picked up any horsepower at all. As a refresher, a while back when I was deciding which camshaft to go with, I made the decision to go ahead and install the camshaft first and leave the stock exhaust manifolds in place long enough to do some cam-only testing. The Summit Cam has 8 more degrees of exhaust duration, which I think will help compensate for the stock exhaust manifolds that I intend to use, at least initially, so that we can isolate and determine how much horsepower the cam is worth by itself. I chose to do it this way because I was curious to know how much a fairly aggressive camshaft would add to the LS2 all by itself, and then a little bit later when I added headers, how much additional horsepower it would pick up at that time. Even after I announced my plan, I received a fair bit of heat in the comments, and to be fair, I also received a fair bit of support from other viewers who were curious to know, just like I was. Anyway, now that I've got the LS2 fairly well tuned, I really want to know right now if it's making any more power or not. Unfortunately, it's too early to go to the drag strip because it's too cold out. I could rent some dyno time, but that would take the better part of a day and cost a couple $100. So instead, I'm going to look at and compare the HP tuner scans that I just took of the LS2 going wide open throttle, and I'll compare them against the scans that I took last fall. If you know what you're looking for, there are several different parameters contained within those scans that should definitely give us a pretty good idea. For those of you that want to get into the weeds a little bit, here's exactly how I intend to use scans from HP tuners. In very simple terms, all LS engines ingest air which is mixed with fuel injected by the fuel injectors. Then it is lit by a spark, which ultimately rotates the crankshaft, creating torque and horsepower. How does the computer know how much fuel to trigger the fuel injectors to spray into the engine? The computer uses the mass airflow sensor, the manifold absolute pressure sensor, and the intake air temperature sensor to calculate how much air has come into the engine, and based upon that, it calculates how much fuel to deliver. That determination made by the computer of how much air is actually entering the engine is quite accurate, provided the tune is properly calibrated and the sensors are in good working order. How do I know that the tune is properly calibrated at wide open throttle? The answer is we use a wideband oxygen sensor. The wideband analyzes the exhaust gases after the combustion has taken place to confirm whether or not the actual air-fuel ratio matches what was commanded by the computer. So when I'm in the process of tuning, if the wideband is telling me that the actual air-fuel ratio is richer or leaner than what is being commanded by the computer, adjustments are made to the tune so that the computer can accurately interpret the data coming from the sensors to properly calculate the true amount of airflow. Small adjustments to the tune continue to be made as many times as necessary by gathering scan data and then making adjustments to the tune until finally the air-fuel ratio reported by the wideband oxygen sensor matches the air-fuel ratio that the computer was commanding. Provided that I am confident that both the before and after cam tunes are calibrated properly, and I am because I did them both, I can look at the amount of air coming into the engine at wide open throttle after the new cam was installed, and anywhere in the power band that the total amount of air coming in has increased, it's reasonable to conclude that more power is being made. I will be using the grams per second data that's being reported by the mass airflow sensor, and to give you an idea of how grams per second relates to horsepower, let's take a look at some scans I've done over the past couple of years, starting with a lower horsepower Corvette and working my way up to some higher horsepower Corvettes. First up is my C5 Corvette back when it was bone stock. As you can see, at or near peak power, it was flowing about 308 grams per second of air. Moving on to a bone stock 2002 C5 Z06. This one flows around 316 grams per second, which makes sense, being as how the 02 Z06 is rated at about 50 horsepower more than a regular C5 coupe. Up next is a friend's cammed C5 Z06, and in this scan it is flowing 351 grams per second for a nice 40 gram per second gain over a stock C5 Z06. Now we have a bigger engine. It's my buddy Ben's 7-liter C6 Z06, and stock they were rated at about 500 horsepower, and his is flowing at about 426 grams per second. Now moving on to my C6 Corvette last fall with 66-degree intake air temperatures, it flowed about 326 grams per second, and now after the cam was installed, on a day that was actually about 10 degrees cooler, it's only flowing 333 grams per second. 7 grams per second of extra air coming into the engine at wide open throttle is negligible, and to be sure that these two scans weren't just flukes, I compared some other before and after camshaft installation scans as well, and came up with the same results. So unless there's something I'm missing or I've overlooked, I can only conclude that the new camshaft is just too aggressive to make much, if any, extra horsepower with the stock exhaust manifolds. Oh, and for those that are wondering, after it was tuned, I did put over 100 miles on this new setup, and it ran with no drivability issues and no check engine lights. So I think the next step in the C6 science project is clear, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next series of videos featuring the installation, testing, tuning, and heat management of these long tube headers. And since you made it to the end, be sure to hit that thumbs up so YouTube knows to share this video with the rest of the Corvette community. And most of all, thanks for watching.